What is game balance? If you're into competitive games, I'm sure you have a pretty decent answer. But can you answer me this question? How do we know when a game is finally balanced? Let me take you back to the early 2010s. League of Legends is one of the most popular competitive games of all time, and on February 16th, 2011, the developers released a patch containing the following change for Vladimir's Sanguine Pool. Removed on-cast bonus, movement speed. The player sentiment after playing the update was rough. Users rushed online to express how bad this change felt. Vladimir's play rate plummeted, and his win rate also decreased. But here's the twist. The developer had forgotten to submit the files for that particular change, and so it never actually went out to players. Game balance isn't real. Okay, I know that might sound ridiculous and dramatic to some of you, but give me a chance before you rush to the comments to light me up. Let's define some terms. Game tuning is the act of adjusting a game to achieve a goal. Tuning is a very real action that developers take. Game tuning is real. Game balance, however, is not an act. It isn't something you do. It's a goal. Generally, developers and players alike want to achieve the goal of game balance. When players give feedback to developers, they often do so with game balance in mind. Developers tune the game to try to achieve balance. Again, tuning is the act, balance is the goal. So while tuning is easily defined, we need to ask, what does game balance as a goal even mean if, as we just learned, simply telling players that something in the game has changed when it has not can so deeply affect their perception of the game's balance? Game balance isn't real. That's right, game balance is mostly just vibes. But they're vibes that really matter. Whether you're a developer tuning a competitive game or a player interested in playing or discussing these games, let me explain why game balance isn't what you think and share some of my techniques for tuning competitive games. But first, why should you care about my view on this topic? Let me introduce myself. My name is Adam Hart, but you might know me as Keats in the fighting game community. As early as age 6, my dad and I would compete with each other and create new games together. I started playing fighting games when Street Fighter II hit arcades in 1991, and I got the competitive itch around 1997. The lack of nearby tournaments led me to running my own local events, which got me hooked enough to start traveling the country to attend regional and major tournaments, which led me to evolving my own events into the Regional Major Series Ultimate Fighting Game Tournament, or UFGT, which popular fighting game commentator Ultra David has called one of the most influential tournament series in FGC history. Thanks, bud. During my travels, I scored an EVO Top 8 medal in 2011 by getting 7th place in Tatsunoko vs. Capcom Ultimate All-Stars. I was the editor-in-chief of top fighting game website Shoryuken.com for many years, writing about news, events, and co-hosting their weekly podcast, Wake Up SRK. I got into game development when I created Dive Kick with my wife and friends, and then I joined Iron Galaxy Studios to release a commercial version. I also helped Iron Galaxy Studios with Street Fighter III Third Strike Online, Marvel vs. Capcom Origins, and Darkstalkers Resurrection. I then served as lead combat designer on Killer Instinct, the 2013 version, Season 2, and for the rest of the game's development cycle, and then as lead designer on Rumbleverse. On Divekick, Killer Instinct, and Rumbleverse, in addition to my many other duties, I was in charge of game tuning, and I interacted heavily with each game's community. In other words, trying to achieve competitive game balance has been a major focus of my career as a game developer since 2012. During this professional experience, I came to view game balance very differently than I did at the start, and very differently than most of our industry. The proof of this view is in the pudding. Endgame Killer Instinct is still considered by many to be one of the greatest fighting games of all time, with major tournaments still ongoing. A lot of players feel its balance is among the best in the entire genre. But before I jump into the meat of this talk, I want to share a quick word about the examples I'm going to use in this video. I lived through nearly all of the events I'm going to reference, but the ones I was less close to required me to do some research. I did my absolute best to represent the facts and feelings of the time, and I want to make it clear that if I use an example in a negative way, that I'm not disparaging the people who made those games, made those design choices, or players who love those games. I want to acknowledge that all of us developers are trying to do the best we can at a very difficult task. We've all made mistakes, me very much included, and I'll probably make more mistakes in the future. The point of this video and its examples isn't to point fingers or say I'm the best or something like that. It's to use our history to observe lessons to help you understand my perspective on game balance. Cool? Alright, let's begin. Has this ever happened to you? You're at the GameStop reading the back of the box for the latest competitive game and the bullet points say, 16 playable characters, 12 fighting stages, the gameplay is very fair. I bet you couldn't wait to get home and play the game so you could experience the fairness firsthand. Let's be real, fairness is not a selling point, and people don't generally buy games because they're fair. Why do people buy games or download them in the case of games that don't require a purchase? Well, the game looks fun. You can do a bunch of cool stuff in it. Explosions, style, mastery. Every person's definition of fun is unique, and the type of fun they seek is their primary motivator when deciding what to play. People also buy games because of FOMO. Their friends or their community are playing and they don't want to be left behind. Gamers will often play a game we don't love just to keep up with our friends. Even outside social pressure, such as everyone's playing it, can trigger the desire to not be left behind. Back before post-launch live service update cycles were the norm, the point of a sale was all that mattered. As a developer, if I could get you to buy your Super Nintendo copy of Street Fighter II, my relationship with you ended right then and there. Wouldn't have mattered to me how long you played the game, or what you thought of the game balance, or the fairness, or any of that. Even if the game was deeply unfair, you'd likely only be playing it against your local friends, and none of you were good enough at the game for that to even really matter. So, as a dev, I just hope that I did a good enough job to make you want to buy the next version of the game in a year or two. Now, game development and marketing costs have skyrocketed. Development timelines are only getting longer, and the way consumers interact with competitive games has completely changed. After your initial purchase or download, it's important for developers to keep players playing. If they aren't playing, they won't be around to buy DLC and fill the online matchmaking queues. So now, it's become just as important to keep players from quitting as it is to get them to buy or download the game in the first place, especially if the game is free to play. If you want to stop players from quitting, you need to fully understand why they quit. Players quit because sometimes it's not about the game itself, and there isn't anything you can do. Maybe a new game came out and pulled their attention away. Perhaps real life happened, and that drastically lowered the player's free time. But there are reasons that players quit that you can at least somewhat control. If a game becomes more frustrating than fun, players will quit. If a game becomes more thoughtless than engaging, players will quit. So, to summarize, games no longer are sold in a box and left as is. Competitive games need to last for years just to justify the rising cost of development. Developers are expected to keep players engaged in playing. That means frustration is a real problem that must be dealt with, boredom is a real problem that must be dealt with, and so developers decide on goals, and then they tinker with their games, and this gets called, rather interchangeably, game tuning, or game patching, or game balancing. But each of these terms has their own definitions, and we should not use them interchangeably. Let's reiterate the terms as I've defined them. Game tuning is the act of making adjustments in your game in an effort to achieve a goal. Game patching is the act of deploying updates to the game. And game balance is merely one possible goal of game tuning. But what is a balanced game, really? How do we know when a game is finally balanced? Is it when every weapon or character is used equally or wins equally? Is it when the players have nothing left to complain about online? Are these things even possible? When we tune a game, we're looking to reach some specific, measurable outcome. So a problem we're about to run into is that game balance doesn't have just one definition that everyone agrees on. Each part of the audience for your game is looking for something different based on their own ideas of what successful game balance looks like to them. Most players' primary driver for wanting game balance is the idea of fairness. They think they want a game in which all options are equally viable, and they can rank up or win a tournament with any character or weapon or team comp that they choose. They want a game where the tools they use are objectively powerful, but are perceived as fair by others, and that those tools are rarely used against them. If the game doesn't feel fair to an individual, that individual gets frustrated. Viewers matter a lot to any modern competitive games ecosystem, and the viewer's primary driver for wanting game balance is variety. They want to tune into live streams and see a lot of different characters and team compositions and weapons represented to keep things interesting. They want to see lots of play styles interacting with each other, especially when viewing tournaments. It's a lot less fun when the top 8 character selections look like this. If the choices being made on screen are too repetitive, viewers get frustrated. And this third one? Yeah, we'll talk about this one later. So how do developers figure out how to tune the game to make it more fair and give it more variety? One common strategy is to survey or talk to players to see what it is they want changed. Another common strategy is to use telemetry to look deeply at data that represents real in-game outcomes, such as use rates or win rates, to try and make it so that things make sense mathematically. And yet, despite trying all of these things, competitive games so often struggle to achieve good game balance. Why is that? Let's break down each of the traditional methods for making tuning decisions and see where they tend to go wrong. Let's start with telemetry. Data lies. On the first day of my high school statistics class, our teacher shared with us a quote from early 20th century Austrian psychiatrist Wilhelm Steckel. Statistics is the art of lying by means of figures. That quote really stuck with me. As it turns out, if you're clever, you can use data to prove almost any point you want. Or worse, data can convince you of a false truth. Data can be very useful in convincing your development teammates of a design direction, but it's much less useful for finding the right tuning decision to make for your audience. Checking telemetry from League of Legends, you might find that the item Mejai's Soulstealer has an absurdly high win rate, often close to 80%, but this statistic is highly misleading. The item is rarely purchased unless you're already winning, which means the player purchasing it was already very likely to win before making the purchase. The developers understood why the win rate for this item was the way it was, and that kept them from making the mistake of trusting the numbers alone and making a poor tuning decision. This means that in order to find guidance within the numbers, you need an extraordinary amount of context. Let's say that you look at your character pick rates, and one of the characters is very underrepresented. Do we have any idea why just from the numbers alone? Is it because the character's too weak? Or are they difficult to use? Or do they lose matchups to some of the most common characters? Or are they just kinda ugly? Without the reason why, this data is effectively useless as a means to understanding what changes to make in your game. Early on in Overwatch's lifespan, developers saw the use rate of the support hero Symmetra was low, and so on December 13th, 2016, they overhauled the character, changing the way her moveset worked. Developer design notes said they wanted to make Symmetra feel more active and give her more meaningful contributions to the team. Overall, Symmetra players liked the changes, but the use rate barely went up. The players were somewhat happy, but the goal of normalizing the use rate was not achieved. She still wasn't very popular. On June 26, 2018, a year and a half later, Symmetra was reworked a second time, this time moving her from a support role into a damage role. Many Symmetra players lost their fun in this overhaul, and some physically disabled players could no longer play the character at all. The use rate dropped below the original version while simultaneously making the player base upset. Without understanding why the use rate was low to begin with, tuning the character, or worse, reworking them entirely, is like throwing darts while blindfolded after being punched in the face. Was the pick rate low because Symmetra was weak? Or was it because her toolkit didn't fit in well with the dominant strategies running the game? Or was it because she was only fun to a certain type of player? And if I may ask, is it even a problem that her pick rate was low, or that the game has niche characters that aren't tournament viable? Well, is it? Without context, data is often worse than useless. It can make you think a problem exists where there isn't one, and it might lead you to making decisions that remove the fun of some of your players. Data without context is dangerous. We should also consider that data is almost never qualitative, and it's easily skewed. Developers that use telemetry to observe the win rates of various characters and weapons will find obvious and large differences when they start to sort that data by player rank. But can we really trust a qualifier like player rank to sort and understand this data? Ranking systems are only good at sorting people who use them a lot. Consider that there are tournament level players who do not play ranked mode often at all, and when they do, they may be much lower ranked than their actual skill level due to their lack of ranked playtime. You must also realize that not everyone in the top ranking bracket is of equal skill, and so this can affect a character's win rate rather drastically even within that segment of players. And within that segment, you may find that certain strategies or characters are barely used at all. Think about what else goes into the win rate. Is this a 1v1 game or a team game? Is the character difficult or easy to use? How do we interpret the stats of a character who thrives in online matchmaking, but struggles to place well in full tournament brackets? How close are the game's best character specialists to reaching each character's known potential? And what don't we know about a character's potential? Even if we could perfectly understand the quality of our win rate data, we simply can't learn enough from it to identify if we even have a problem to address, let alone possible solutions to that problem. Maybe we can spot a lopsided matchup with data from time to time, which can be really helpful in knowing where to look, but it isn't at all helpful in figuring out what to change. Remember, data will lie to you. Using Street Fighter VI's publicly available telemetry, we can see such a case in action. Dhalsim, Lily, Honda, Rashid, Blanka, and Kimberly are the bottom 6 characters in terms of use rates and ranked, both across all ranks overall and when isolating the master rank players. And yet, the characters with the highest win rates in master rank are, in order, Honda, Kimberly, Dhalsim, JP, Blanka, Rashid. So this is almost the exact inverse. And player conceptions of these characters placed in the tier lists bear no relation to any of this data. Most players think Blanka and Rashid are high tier, Honda and Lily are low tier, and ideas about Dhalsim and Kimberly's strength vary wildly. This data could easily lead you to believe that these 6 characters are weak due to underuse, or make you think that they're too strong because of their high win rates. Data without context is dangerous, yes, but even trying to apply proper context to your data is almost impossibly difficult. So if we can't really trust data to guide us, we should probably talk to the players in our community, right? After all, they play the most, they're often extremely skilled, and they know the game pretty damn well. Well, unfortunately, even though most of them don't mean to, players frequently lie too. If you've been in or around game dev long enough, you've certainly heard the phrase, players don't know what they want. This isn't entirely true in my experience. There's a relatively well-known clip of me from the wonderful Fight On Killer Instinct documentary by Hold Back to Block, in which I tell an anecdote about a time when the KI community rallied together and really wanted us to nerf Jago. Specifically, his ability to heal himself by landing fireballs during his instinct mode made them feel like they had to kill him 3 times instead of 2. But nerfing his healing, as they'd requested, would have cut away at the character's core identity and a large part of what makes him unique and fun to play. The community was laser focused on seeing the healing as the problem, and their view of the game was that Jago was either too strong or too frustrating to play against, depending on who you asked. Whether this was the true state of the game or not is not relevant. They believed Jago was a problem, and their perception, no matter how flawed, is the reality they live in. To tune games properly, you must accept this. A player's perception is their reality. So instead of succumbing to the community pressure campaign and nerfing Jago's healing, we took a different approach that allowed us to maintain his fun and unique healing gimmick, while weakening some of the more brainless parts of his kit that allowed him to negate his intended weaknesses too easily. The community cooked us pretty hard for a few weeks, insisting that this wasn't the change they asked for and wouldn't make a difference. But a few weeks after that, complaining about Jago had all but stopped. Players knew they wanted a weaker Jago. It's just that their idea of how to do it would have had way worse knockdown effects on the game and Jago player base than what we landed on. And of course, a very small number of Jago players were unable to adapt to the changes that we did end up going with, and they either switched characters or quit the game entirely. That sucks. But it's a natural part of the tuning process. You can't please everyone, but you can limit the negative blowback of a nerf if you're thoughtful. Was Jago too strong on paper? Did he even need to be nerfed in the first place? Believe it or not, it doesn't actually matter. Ultimately, players were frustrated, and something had to be done about that. The something we chose weakened Jago, which is what the players wanted, but the way we did it strayed pretty far from most of the common complaints. So, in a way, players do occasionally know what they want. It's just that they don't usually know the least destructive way to get there. Most of your user base will lie to you, but I'll state again, they usually don't mean to. They're generally well-intentioned and they just want the game to get better. But better for who? Even among the most well-meaning users, you'll find that the overwhelming majority of them struggle to see the big picture or consider the viewpoints of others. Their idea of a better game is very commonly one in which they, with their character or weapon of choice, can win more easily. Things that beat their playstyle get weakened, and their playstyle gets stronger, and no one complains about their playstyle so they can feel good about using it. I used to think this way myself, so I'm not trying to cut you down if you currently think this way. It goes without saying that this isn't a good way to make a more fair or less frustrating game, so you need to take every piece of feedback that you get with a massive grain of salt and try to apply as much context to it as possible. Developers can be easily misled by data, sure, but they can even more easily be misled by players. Data can be convincing, but players can be very, very loud and hard to ignore. It is, of course, not possible to know what you don't currently know. But that won't stop players from insisting that their perspective is the truth. After all, to them, it currently is, but their perspective can shift quickly. Players are very easily influenced and misled. Influencer types can, often without even meaning to, construct completely false narratives that large swaths of your user base will bandwagon on and help amplify. Suddenly, the desires or misinformation of just one popular player can start to sound like hundreds or thousands of people who all agree about what the problem is and how to fix it. Groupthink is a major issue that puts a lot of social pressure on devs that can be very difficult to navigate. And it isn't just influential players or malicious players who can influence a crowd. It's often tournament results themselves. Early on, after the launch of Injustice 2 in May of 2017, generational talent Sonic Fox won nearly every tournament they attended using Captain Cold, a character that many at the time thought was on the weaker end of the roster. Sonic Fox's dominant win streak resulted in a community that was forced to reassess the actual strength of the character, and eventually developers that nerfed the character despite Sonic Fox's insistence that Captain Cold was indeed weak and just counterpicked certain characters well. But you don't even have to go on a dominant winning streak to change people's views. After Super Street Fighter IV launched in April of 2010, Right before tournament season really kicked off, many of us looked to our strongest players to assess the power levels of the 10 new characters that were added to the roster. Going into EVO 2010 on July 9th, the widespread sentiment among top players was that Adon was among the weaker characters added to the game. Many of us went into that event writing the character off completely. And then GamerB took 5th place out of about 1,700 players with Adon that weekend in the largest open bracket tournament we had seen to date, totally upending how we had viewed the character for months without a single balance change.
GamerB from Taiwan using Adon. For all you people out there who don't believe that Adon can take it to the top 8.
In an even more dramatic example, let's look at Super Smash Bros. Melee, one of the most popular competitive games of all time, and a game that has not been patched since the 1.02 Player's Choice discs were released in 2003. Melee has a very long and well-documented history of community agreed upon tier lists to rank the strongest and weakest characters. By all conventional wisdom, Yoshi sat as the 21st best character in the game, in a roster of 26. Not good. And then AMSA appeared in the tournament scene and started getting results with Yoshi. Yoshi's rank went from 21st to 12th, from 2013 to 2015, and after AMSA's win at Big House 10 in October of 2022, arguably the hardest Melee major of all time, Yoshi now sits as the 10th best character in the game on community tier lists. Despite nothing about the game changing, Yoshi rose 11 spots in the ranks.
Yoshi is the best of the 987 competitors.
Again, we simply cannot know what we do not know. Whether it's Sonic Fox thinking their tournament-winning character is weak, or a consensus of top players thinking that a character they don't even main is weak just before a breakout performance, or AMSA believing in their character's power despite ridiculous execution requirements and being the only one in the world who can do it, it just goes to show you how easily players and developer opinions can be swayed by tournament results and influencers. When groupthink and player pressure campaigns arrive at your doorstep, it's incredibly hard, maybe impossible as a developer, to know what situation you're actually in and guess right. Is the character weak or strong? Without many years of evidence, you'll have to make an assumption. You'll be right sometimes, and you'll be wrong other times, and it's a huge part of why tuning a competitive game is so difficult. And of course, when talking about our inability to know what we don't yet know and how that influences the way we think about our passions and the world, I need to remind you, dear viewer, of the Dunning-Kruger effect. We can be extremely confident that we know everything about the state of a game when we, in fact, are only seeing a small part of the big picture. Even the strongest players in the world who are regularly winning tournaments may only be aware of a tiny fraction of what's possible within a play space. And while balanced discussions and tier list theorizing can be incredibly fun, it is for these reasons that players make misleading and unreliable sources of guidance when deciding how to tune your game. Okay, so we can't rely on data or players for guidance, but what about the goals we'd set out to achieve in the first place? Let's examine our list of goals and try to understand if we're even attempting to steer in the right direction. Goal number 1, a favorite goal of players, is fairness. Fairness should not and cannot ever be a goal. Why? Because no two players can ever universally agree on what is fair. It's an emotional metric that changes by the minute depending on who you ask, the results of their latest ranked match, what salty player showed up on their social media algorithm that day. It is simply not an achievable goal because game balance is mostly vibes. You cannot measure your success by measuring fairness, as the only way to do so, data or player surveys, are frequently misleading. Remember, as a developer, you also don't know what you don't know. Things you think you know may be false, and you are just as easy to manipulate as the players are. Remember that League of Legends example from the start of the video about Vladimir Sanguine Pool? That wasn't the only time something like that happened in League. When the champion Riven was released, she was viewed by the community as weak. Riot devs apparently agreed and hotfixed in some buffs for the character. Shortly after posting the hotfix notes on the forums, the character's play rate spiked and the feedback was very positive. Players reported how good the buffs felt and what a difference they made, but the hotfix hadn't actually gone live yet. The character was unchanged. Game balance is mostly vibes. The idea of fairness is so individual to each player that it can never be an achievable or even measurable goal. Even when groupthink makes it seem like thousands of players have the same view on an issue, their overall feelings of fairness will differ greatly. Only way to tune your game into a state in which no player is complaining is to make them all quit. Because of these reasons, I strongly recommend that we stop using the idea of fairness as a tuning goal. Goal number 2. A favorite goal of viewers is variety. But variety is not the result of mathematical balance or fairness. It's the result of enabling diverse player expression. Let me explain why. Each individual player has their own playstyle and their own view on what aspects of your game or characters are fun. This includes the type of risks different players want to take when trying to win. Some players want to play it as safe as possible and focus on reactions with a low-risk, low-reward strategy. Other players may want to gamble, taking big bets and trying to get maximum rewards. And everything in between those two extremes exists as well. If a character is harder to learn and pilot and optimize, should that character be equal in theoretical power output with a character that's trivial to learn and pilot and optimize? An easy character could be considered low risk. A difficult character could be considered high risk. If both risks result in the same reward, which character will most players choose? Or, to put it more plainly, one character is low risk, high reward, and the other one is high risk, high reward. What I've observed over the years is that when a game is tuned toward a more flat mathematical balance, playstyles start to converge. When this happens, players gravitate towards one of two types of characters. They'll either play the characters that are easiest to win with, thus lowering their risk, or they'll play the characters that look the coolest or sexiest, because the vibes matter a lot to us. And watch out if your easy characters are also your coolest ones. We won't often achieve tournament variety by flattening win rate and use rates, because doing so flattens out the number of reasons different players gravitate toward different characters or play patterns. It's the quantity of different motivators that you offer to your players that breeds variety. Despite not being widely considered to have the most balanced roster, the original version of Guilty Gear Xrd Sign would frequently see large variety of characters in tournament top 8s. Why? Because the characters are so different and diverse that they appeal strongly to different player types. Conversely, in the Tekken series, many of the characters share variations of the same game plan and have similar risk-reward values, but in Guilty Gear, almost no characters play even remotely alike. This is why when Tekken misses the mark, it's much more common to see something like 4 Bobs in a Tekken 6 top 8, like at EVO 2011, or 6 Leroys in a Tekken 7 top 8, like at EVO Japan in 2020. If the Guilty Gear developers worked hard to flatten the game using data, they'd end up destroying many players' favorite playstyles, and the result would almost certainly be a game with less variety for viewers. And we did, in fact, end up seeing this in motion at the launch of Guilty Gear Strive, which had top 8s dominated by many appearances of Soul Bad Guy, a character boasting the trifecta of easy to use, powerful, and super cool. Because at launch, Strive was more simple, and many of the characters felt more samey than in past iterations of the franchise, players gravitated towards this very easy and powerful badass. Down the line, as new mechanics and extremely unique characters were added to the roster, tournament variety improved a great deal. As a goal, variety is an admirable and understandable one. It's actually measurable with telemetry or by looking at tournament results. And if you aren't hitting a good level of variety, your player base will absolutely let you know. But unfortunately, I believe that you'll have a much harder time achieving variety by making it your end goal. Variety is a symptom of a healthy game ecosystem, not the result of a mathematically balanced game. Variety has another enemy, optimization of play patterns, which I'm going to talk more about later. And finally, the third goal that we skipped over at the beginning, the only real and true goal worth pursuing with game tuning efforts: player retention. Retention is all about making your existing players want to play more, or at a bare minimum, preventing them from quitting. Fairness is a cute idea. Variety is nice to have if you can get it, but if players aren't playing, there isn't any point to anything you might change in your game. We tune the game and engage with players so that they'll continue playing. That is the goal. We already discussed why players quit, and among the reasons within our control are that they get too frustrated or the gameplay stops being thoughtful and engaging, so they get bored. Using this, we can break down our main retention goal into smaller parts. We need to A, reduce player frustration, B, increase and reinforce thoughtful play patterns that result in engagement, and C, do all of that while trying to enable and maintain a high level of diverse player expression. Easy, right? Naturally, doing all of those things while keeping a community happy with the direction you're going is not so easy after all. But in my experience, there are strategies you can use to make it work. So here's my approach to game tuning with those goals in mind. To the developers watching this, the tuning strategies and methodologies I use work for me. They might work for you or they might not. My goal is to share with you what I've learned so that you can use the parts that make sense for you and your project. Just remember to always be critical about what you use and why. To players watching this, I hope you take away an improved vocabulary about game tuning and a wider view of what the goals of game tuning really are. And I hope that you can use this to improve the way you communicate with developers and each other. The classical approach of using data as a metric to measure the success of your tuning efforts is what I'll call tuning for flatness, wherein you try to achieve fairness and variety by normalizing telemetry and survey data. But when tuning, you need to approach the problem less like a banker balancing the books and more like a beekeeper making sure that the hive is healthy and thriving. Imagine that you're responsible for balancing the environment of Earth, and you get a data report and discover that there are 20 quadrillion ants on the planet, but only 3 trillion trees. If you believe this is an imbalance, you aren't in the right mindset to tune a competitive game. A version of Earth with 20 quadrillion trees would have no space at all for anyone to exist. A version with only 3 trillion ants is going to cause serious ecological disasters as the food chain collapses. Good game tuning has a lot more in common with musical composition than it does hard science. It requires harmonious choices, purposeful and intentful imbalance of volume and frequency and tempo to achieve the desired emotional effect. What works in one song won't necessarily work in another, which means one game's right answers might be totally wrong for another. All aspects of your game need to harmonize and come together to be stronger than the sum of all of its parts. I call this tuning for harmony. When tuning a game, you're the conductor. Your job is to lead players emotionally where you'd like them to go, not follow the player's whims or manipulate telemetry numbers. A game that is tuned for harmony is trying to achieve retention by creating a game state in which the highest number of players can each have their own unique brand of fun, express themselves, and stay engaged. This is a harmonious environment where joy and passion can thrive. Any imbalance that you put into place with intent is, based on your vision for the game, there to make it more interesting and exciting. It isn't an accident. Mathematical imbalance in your telemetry is not seen as a problem under this lens. It could be a symptom of a problem sometimes, but it could just as well be that the imbalance actually makes the whole stronger. How will you know the difference? Well, in order to tune for harmony, you're going to need a few things. First, you're going to need to put someone on your team in charge of game tuning, and that person needs to be able to play at a high enough level to feel the real game. They don't have to be tournament champions or the best in the world, but they should be strong enough to play alongside players of that caliber. This player needs to be under a few mandates. Number one, they can't play in tournaments, so they can't be selfish about tuning. I'm not saying no one on your team can compete, I'm just suggesting that this one person should not compete in the game that you are making. They can feel free to compete in other games to scratch that itch. Number two, they shouldn't even have a main character or weapon. And they should spend their playtime using the characters or weapons the community think are the weakest, and against strong players using the characters or weapons people think are the most offending to see if they even agree. Number three, they should try to think of the game as a whole, play the whole roster relatively well, and understand what aspects of each character are the most core to their identity and fun factor. A player who, say, only uses grapplers or only uses shotguns and can't get out of their comfort zone is going to struggle in this role. Number four, they should try to understand the feelings of players at various skill levels and keep each bracket of players in mind when tuning. You don't tune to give weaker players a chance against more experienced players, but you do need to tune against inexperienced players' unique frustrations if you want to retain them. This can be a challenging set of asks for a member of your team, but I believe it's crucial. This person is your lantern in a dark cave. Without them, you'll be lost, and you'll spend most of your time guessing your way back to the light. If you don't have this person on your team, you're going to have to find them externally and hire them. Next, listen to your players. Seriously. Players lie, but you still need to hear them. Players are often right about the symptoms, even if they don't understand the best ways to fix the problems. If you can, find a few players who love your game and have a better big picture sense than most, and talk to them a lot. These players are your canary in the coal mine. Don't take what they say at face value, always think critically, but a discussion with these key people can lead you to the right choices much more quickly and accurately, or keep you from making major mistakes. On KI, of the hundreds of players I spoke to, I trusted exactly 2 to give me the kind of feedback that helped me validate or make tuning decisions, and maybe 10 more to give me thoughts that were helpful. I learned who was who by chatting with the players a lot and being observant. Even with their help, we didn't make the right choice 100% of the time, and you won't either. But you should try to find your key players and make your success rate stronger. As you get information from telemetry and player sentiment reports, filter it and test against it rigorously. It's critical that you do not knee-jerk react to the things you hear, and it can be extremely difficult not to when influencer groupthink pressure campaigns arrive at your doorstep. You need to deploy changes quickly enough to minimize frustration, but you need to be measured enough to know when a problem is being overblown or a solution that works for your game has not yet been found. As an example, in Killer Instinct and Rumbleverse, I found that an average of 3 to 4 weeks worked for non-catastrophic issues based on those games' audiences and goals. For catastrophic issues, every day counts, and you need to get those fixes out in 2 to 3 days if possible, while communicating often with the community. In most phases of game dev, there's a mountain of work to do and not enough time to do it all. So how do you prioritize your work and attention? During development, before you even have players, you need to spend time and energy on features that will let you deploy quick game tuning changes without full and expensive title updates. These hotfix systems could literally save your game's life. Once your game is out, stay alert for mega frustrators. Things in the game that are so far out of bounds that players won't tolerate them until your next major patch. Use your hotfix system and nuke these from orbit. There's a lot of competition for players' attention, so don't give them an excuse to quit and play something else. Early on in Rumbleverse, players discovered a bug when double bouncing using a stop sign weapon that allowed them to safely drop a city block-sized instant kill damage zone with 0 counterplay. Our next patch was 5 weeks away, and our user base would have shrunk to near nothing in mere days if we had been unable to fix this issue. Thanks to our hotfix system, we were able to get a fix deployed to players in a few days instead of the 5 weeks it would have taken if we had to wait for our next major patch, ensuring that most of the frustrated players retained. Nailing this built trust between us and the players, so that if something like that ever happened again, they'd help calm each other down knowing that we'd likely fix it quickly. There are of course some common mistakes to avoid when tuning. You should avoid focusing on individual character versus character or team comp versus team comp matchup tuning. Conceptually, these things are big buckets of variables, and it's way too easy to get lost and cause unexpected knockdown effects in other areas of your game if you take on something so broad. You should instead spend time on much smaller and clearer details, which I'll discuss in this section. You also need to avoid overreacting or reacting too quickly if the severity of the issue isn't high. Judge severity by the level of frustration it seems to be causing. Validate it yourself by playing against it and see how pissed off you get. So after all that, what exactly is my method? First, I start by thinking about the big picture of risk versus reward across the entire game. So many tuning decisions can be more smartly made if you're able to correctly assess both the risk and reward of common actions in the game. Any new character or move you put in the game has to match this framework that you've conceptualized. Let's see some basic examples of risk versus reward and assess them. Think about headshots in shooters. If you aim for the body and you miss left or right, you hit the arms. If you miss low, you hit the legs. If you miss high, you might get a headshot. Your risk of missing when aiming for the body is at its lowest, and the reward is usually standard damage. If you aim for the head and you miss low, you hit the body and you get standard damage. But if you miss left, right, or high, you don't hit the target at all and deal no damage. The reward for a headshot is vastly increased damage output if you can land it. As a system, the risk-reward of headshots makes logical and practical sense. This is a good example of an extremely common and effective risk-reward system that breeds thoughtful play, as both aiming for the body or head are effective, but carry different levels of risk and reward that change as you switch weapons, distances, fight targets that move at different speeds, or even increase your own skill level. Now let's look at a risk-reward problem. Take for example Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. If you use Magneto's heavy attack, which is slower and harder to land to start your combo damage will be high enough to kill even the sturdiest characters in the game. However, if you start your combo with a quick light attack that comes out fast and hits low and it's one of the easiest moves in the game to land, your combo damage will still be high enough to kill even the sturdiest characters in the game. The lower and higher risk options both have the same reward. So in this case, skilled players will almost unanimously gravitate towards using low-risk attacks since the outcome is the same no matter what. Let's compare that to another game's take on this. In Guilty Gear Strive, using a quick punch or kick attack has less combo options and scales the combo's damage and hit stun duration more harshly. Using a slower slash or heavy slash attack gives you the highest damage combo starters and lets you combo more generously. The lower risk option here has a lower reward. This gives players a reason to use more of their options in various situations, rather than falling back to the easy and quick ones. The next thing to look out for when hunting risk-reward problems is unjustified inconsistency. Let's check out Killer Instinct. In KI, every character has a 5-frame quick attack, but not every character has the same range or properties on their quickest attack. Not all of them get the same level of reward. Is this a problem? If the designers made these choices randomly, it might very well be. But if you deliberately design weaknesses into the character kits to compensate for their more extreme strengths, which is usually where their identity and fun lie, it could be perfectly okay to have a character whose quickest attack has poor range, or one that can't be rapid fire cancelled, or one that can only successfully combo into one specific unsafe opener special move. Context is everything. Equality will flatline the playstyles. Risk-reward should make sense within each character, but also across all characters. Consider the characters Saberwolf, who is one of the easiest characters to play as, and Arya, who is the most difficult character in the game to play as. As I mentioned before, high difficulty is a risk, as the player has way more mistakes they could conceivably make in a match, and their options may be much more difficult to optimize. In a game tuned for flatness, perhaps Saberwolf and Arya should have a similar potential at top levels of play. But when balancing for harmony, we must acknowledge that Arya's high difficulty means she should have a higher number of top level advantages than other characters. Her higher risk should be justified by a higher potential reward. If an easier character could match her potential, almost no one would invest time into the character. Imbalance can absolutely ruin a game, or imbalance could create harmony. How? If each character's moves are not built equally, there's an imbalance in their strengths and weaknesses. Without the imbalance of high-risk, high-reward characters living alongside low-risk, low-reward characters, player identity gets stifled. You need to find the right mix. So long as the risk-reward values across your game make sense together, player identities will shine through and create variety and reduce repetitive play patterns. For instance, low or no risk tactics that have high rewards, such as safe jumps in fighting games, can be simultaneously boring for the attacker and very frustrating for the defender. Try to use this line of thinking to identify outliers, and then study the characters or situations these outliers belong to so you can understand if they're a problem or not. Be purposeful with your design. Build in deliberate strengths and weaknesses, and commit to them. This is not scientific. The developer responsible for game tuning is going to need a strong vision, a clear understanding of their target audience, and the ability to step back and try to feel all of this from a distance and see the big picture. The next thing you need to stay on top of is frustration. The opposite of frustration is fun, and so these exist on a single scale together. Some frustration is okay, and it can even be good for your game, so long as frustration doesn't overtake fun for your target audience. Imagine leaping off a building in a game with fall damage versus one without. The game without fall damage is definitely less frustrating, but it also lacks the adrenaline rush of attempting the leap and finding a way to land safely despite the danger. Neither of these approaches are wrong, it's just that each better suits a different audience. When an individual's frustration outweighs their fun, they quit. In a single player game, this part's really easy. In Zelda Breath of the Wild, the fun is in exploring and traversing this massive, handcrafted world, solving puzzles, getting into battles, and then you have to interact with the very frustrating menus to cook food and manage your inventory, and then all of your weapons break. Some parts of the game are fun, and some parts are frustrating. They pull on each other within me to help me decide if I should keep playing or quit. So let's explain the fun-frustration scale a bit better. It weighs my own personal fun versus my own personal frustration. This scale represents me, not the game itself. This scale is not about truth, it's about my relationship with the game. If the fun side weighs more, I keep playing. I'll place weights that represent my personal enjoyment from exploration, puzzles, and combat on the left side. The fun side of the scale is heavier now, and so it moves down. Fun weighs more. And now I'll place weights that represent my own personal frustration from having to cook or navigate menus, or when my weapons break. Maybe the weight of your personal frustration from, say, weapons breaking is less than mine, and that would be reflected on your own personal version of this scale. As you can see, the total weight of my fun in Breath of the Wild is heavier than the total weight of my frustrations. If we make the cooking interface a little better, the weight of my total frustration lowers, but the weight of my fun doesn't increase, because improving the cooking interface doesn't improve the exploration, even though it does improve my overall relationship with the game. Remember, the lower side of the scale is the one that's winning out. Even in competitive games, some frustration is totally unrelated to gameplay aspects of the product. Like if it takes you 3 minutes to simply log into the game and another 8 minutes to find a match. But on the gameplay side of competitive games, this concept is a series of landmines, because it is extremely common that one player's fun is exactly the other player's frustration. The more fun you let a player have, the more frustrated their opponent on the receiving end of that fun is likely to be. I think we all understand that players quit because frustration overtakes fun, and this obviously happens when the weight of the frustration side of the scale gets heavier. But it can also happen if the weight of the fun side gets lighter. If I make something less frustrating for the victim, it may reduce fun for the attacker. It's very often zero-sum. In this example, this individual's frustration about being hit wasn't very high in the first place, and didn't change when combos got shorter. But because they enjoyed doing long combos so much, the weight of their fun dropped, suddenly causing frustration to outweigh the fun for them. This change may have drastically reduced the frustration for another player and improved their personal scale, while causing this particular player to consider quitting. In the gameplay of competitive games, you generally can't make things universally better for everyone. There will almost always be a give and take. Because of this, you need to communicate heavily with and keep an eye on your community to see frustration trends appearing. And you need to move quickly to test against them to see how valid you believe they are. Some frustrations can be healthy for a game. Remember, this is an ecosystem. High highs are rarely possible without low lows. What you need to look out for are mega frustrators, things that are so annoying to deal with that no matter how fair their risk-reward values may seem, that they have to be tuned or you're going to rapidly lose chunks of your audience. We often only make game tuning decisions around risk and reward with top-level play in mind. We do this because factually, mid and lower-level players are not able to observe the whole of the known game yet and are extremely unlikely to notice the risk-reward tuning that we do. But when tuning against frustration, we need to consider all levels of play. In Killer Instinct, Gargos has a Portal Punch move, a tracking projectile that can start a ranged combo. This move was easier to deal with at higher levels of play. Its risk-reward values mostly made sense, it had counterplay, and it fit the character's kit really well. But at mid to low levels of play, this move became a mega frustrator. The answers to it, while available and plentiful, were not apparent enough at those levels of play, and the move was causing a number of players to threaten to quit. We tested against this claim as best as we could, and ultimately agreed that this move had crossed the line for that level of play. As a result, we adjusted the move quite a few times to find a spot that still worked for top level play, but was much less frustrating at other levels of play. Even at low levels of play, if a player feels like their opponent can beat them with just one brain-dead tactic, which they'll often call spam, they'll frustrate out of the game. Importantly, there is a limit to how weak we were willing to make this move. After a certain point, we had to let the community know that we were not taking the move out of the game, and that if they were struggling to deal with this version of the move, they'd need to practice. Our goal isn't to solve the problem for everyone, but to reach a compromise that still might ask some players to overcome their frustrations. If you show your community that you're listening and they believe in you, they will invest effort on their side more readily to overcome challenges and minor frustrations, meeting you in the middle. That means sometimes, yes, asking players to learn or practice is a part of the bargain. Speaking of brain-dead stuff, we need to prevent people from getting bored. On a moment-to-moment level, this makes thoughtless gameplay our enemy. You're spending a lot of time not making meaningful decisions. Even if the base actions feel great and have great feedback, you'll eventually get bored. Engagement is the result of making a decision and then seeing the rewarding or punishing results of that decision. Remember our Rumbleverse stop sign nuke example? This technique was extremely frustrating to get hit by, but was super fun and funny to do to people at first. But once you mastered the movement needed to do it, which to be honest wasn't very hard at all, it became a thoughtless way to play. You'd land in the world, find a stop sign, nuke a city block, repeat. Brain off. So even the people using and abusing the technique were experiencing disengagement due to the degenerate play pattern the stop sign nuke represented. Long combos or block strings in fighting games with zero or infrequent defensive mechanics can also cause a lot of disengagement. Players across many genres do not respond well to losing control of their character. In fighting games, you lose control of your character every time you get hit. My own small-scale studies show players starting to disengage and have frustration spikes on average between the 6 and 8 second marks of losing control of their character. Obviously, some individuals, especially in the FGC, have an extreme tolerance to this and can routinely sit through repetitive 40-second long combos on the receiving end, but this, in my experience, is not a critical mass of people. I'm not saying you should never make a game with long combos, I'm just suggesting that you need to understand the kind of audience you're trying to retain. And if the long combos do exist, find ways to make them more varied and or less frequent. Disengaged players on defense are very likely to quit, but disengaged players on offense are, believe it or not, also likely to quit. Game balance and target audience are extremely related. It's not just that the audience has its own feelings about game balance and what frustrations weigh the most to them, but also that different types of game balance attract and repel different types of audiences. And different audiences self-select into different types of games and game balance outcomes. Let's look at 3 example scales. In the first, developers worked very hard to sand off every frustration they could, regardless of how much fun had to go to achieve that. Even though the weight of the frustration side is light, so is the weight of the fun side of the scale. This can result in even very minor frustrations feeling oversized. It can make spending time with the game feel not worth it because the fun it delivers is sterile or bland. Players of this game have less reasons to quit, yes, but they also have less reasons to play. In the second scale, developers didn't really care about frustrators, so this theoretical game has a very high frustration weight, but it also has a very high fun weight. You'll notice that the ratio of the scale is similar to the first, but the actual weight of each side matters a great deal. While the audience may be smaller in this type of game, the immense weight of the fun side of the scale is going to have the players who can deal with the high level of frustration calling this a favorite game. Some players call these kinds of games kusoge, Japanese slang for shitty game. They say it lovingly and disparagingly all at once. It's fascinating. In the final scale, which is probably the ideal goal for developers for most projects, frustrations were addressed carefully in ways that, while inevitably did lower the weight of the fun side a bit, didn't overdo it. This scale is indeed the healthiest of the three examples, as the weight of the fun is still high, and it vastly outweighs the frustration side. That's why it's so important to know your audience. None of these three results are wrong or bad. They just serve different people. As you tune your competitive game, you need to keep your target audience in mind. I highly suggest using Quantic Foundry's data on player motivation to help segment your audience into buckets you can more easily understand. There will be people outside of your target audience who will try your game, and the majority of these people are unretainable. In this example, our core audience member on the left is happy, but our player from outside the core group on the right is having less fun, because this isn't their usual kind of game, and their unfamiliarity adds even more frustration. If the weight of their frustration is so high that reducing some of it still leaves their frustration outweighing their fun, the game just isn't for them. But if you insist on trying to reduce the weight of their frustration, you may be cutting away at the fun of your core audience, which could also result in some of their frustration suddenly outweighing their fun. In this example, we made changes that made the game less frustrating for people outside the core audience by changing things in the game that were not frustrating at all to the core users. The result of that was a loss of fun for the core players. We failed to make enough of a dent to retain people outside the core group, and now we've put a portion of our core audience at risk of quitting too. Not every edge needs softening. If you're lucky enough to make a game that lasts for quite a long time, you may also encounter players who, despite loving your game and thinking that it's relatively well-tuned, are becoming bored from repetition. At this time, you'll have to weigh the reward of doing some kind of tuning shakeup to get people re-engaged, against the risk of that action frustrating a vocal and influential part of your community. The Street Fighter VI community is going through this right now as of filming in early 2026. Many in the community feel the game is well-tuned, but still want a big shakeup anyway because they are becoming bored. Matches are lacking in surprise or discovery, and the feeling of "I've seen it all" is hurting their experience. And finally, we get back to play pattern optimization. Optimization is the enemy. I'm not talking about software performance here. I'm talking about players optimizing their gameplay choices to minimize risk and maximize reward. Optimal combos, option selects, unbreachable map positioning, etc. You need to make a game where the right answers are much more obscured, or better yet, much more plentiful. You want a game where surprise and discovery can continue for as long as possible post-launch. For instance, Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3's fast-paced, neutral, and rapid decision-making is one of the best parts of the game and has lots of surprises and memorable moments even 15 years later. But when I land a hit with virtually any attack, it becomes very clear what I should do. I should perform my very long combo with little to no reason for variation and kill your character. This optimal play gives me maximal reward with minimum decision making, so long as I can execute, and takes up a large portion of the time spent playing during any match. During the combo, a skilled attacker is only engaged at the start as they try to stabilize the opponent and decide if they need to burn X Factor or any meter. The defender should try to engage the entire time no matter how long the combo, in case the combo drops on accident or a reset is attempted. But focusing for that long without meaningful decisions to make is exhausting, and it also results in disengagement and frustration. Street Fighter VI steps it up by obscuring optimal combos quite a bit better than Marvel vs. Capcom 3. When you score a hit, the starter you used can matter a lot more. You need to look at screen position, your drive meter, your opponent's drive meter, your health, your opponent's health, what round it is, your own super meter conditions to make sure you can decide how to best optimize what combo to do, how much resources to spend. This game is much harder to optimize, but ultimately it can be done. Top level play in Street Fighter VI after a while has virtually every player using the same combos in similar situations once those players are fluent enough in the game to know the optimal answer in each situation. Though you do see some player expression variation, with some high-risk players spending more drive meter to burn themselves out on purpose more frequently, while others are more conservative with their gauge if the combo isn't going to kill or checkmate. Street Fighter VI makes the right answers more plentiful, more diverse in risk-reward values, and they take longer for players to optimize because there are so many variables. Ideally, you want to make a game where, instead of the right answers being difficult but ultimately possible to optimize, players are presented with a variety of correct answers, each representing their own risk-reward values. So instead of a community working together to solve the game like a puzzle, after which conformity of playstyle begins to occur, players will instead focus on making the choices that best fit their own personalities. Player expression breeds variety. Imagine a series of possible combos all starting from the same hit confirm. Each does more damage than the last, but is also harder to execute than the last. This may seem like a proper setup for risk and reward, and it isn't a bad way to start, but at top levels of play where execution starts to become irrelevant, what you'll get is a push towards optimization and conformity instead of expression and variety. Trying to create a system in which different combo routes give expressly different outcomes and have their own advantages and disadvantages beyond executional requirements will ensure that players can play their own way. Variety isn't just in character or weapon selection, it's also found within the playstyles of the people who use the same characters or weapons if your game is harmonizing correctly. Harmony is not about making it hard for players to find the right answer, it's about giving them many right answers and letting each player lean towards their own favorites. In game design, all things should be done with intent. If someone asks me why I made a recent design decision and my answer is, I don't know, then I messed up. I may be forced to make a suboptimal decision from time to time due to various circumstances beyond my control, but I should still be able to clearly express why the decision was made. And you need to work very hard to make sure your players know that you move with intent. This means your patch notes need to communicate both what you're doing and why you're doing it. You need clear, detailed, thorough notes or videos that include reasons why your team chose these changes. Even if players disagree with your reasoning, they should be able to see clear intent. If they can see intent, trust will build, and it will often keep them from labeling you as someone blindly throwing darts to choose balance adjustments. I originally wrote a version of this talk that you're watching now back in 2019, and in the time between then and now, I'm very happy to report that developers across all the games that I play and watch have improved drastically in the area of patch notes. Keep it up, thank you. As you tune, you will make mistakes. However, a community that has trust and confidence in you will tolerate those mistakes with lower levels of frustration, and will generally perceive the state of the game's balance more favorably because, after all, game balance is mostly just vibes. Vibes that you have a heavy hand in establishing and influencing. Remember, the process is not hear about the problem, followed by fix the problem. The process needs to be hear about the problem, investigate, and decide if you even agree it's a real problem. Use everything you've learned to find a solution to the problem that weighs all of the other problems that need solving, and how that solve might hurt or destabilize other parts of the game and the audience. And then communicate with your players. So, to wrap this up, I believe a balanced roster isn't one where every character has an equal shot at winning, but it's one where there's a little something for every type of player within your core audience. I once heard a player ask why developers couldn't just balance a game before it came out. And as I hope you understand by now, that would be an impossible task because the audience, who will eventually decide what balance even means to them, haven't even touched the game yet. Tuning for harmony is my personal method of game tuning. It served me well across KI and Rumbleverse, and I hope you learned a lot about the goals and hazards of game tuning from this talk. If you're in charge of tuning a competitive game, you should do what works for you and your community. If you really believe in tuning for flatness or whatever method you use, and it's working for your team, and you're achieving your goals, that's rad. Keep doing that. If you want to try some or all of my methods, that's cool too. I'll make myself available for consulting with folks in the industry who do this kind of work if people want that. Just hit me up on Blue Sky or wherever and we can work something out. Whatever your personal takeaways are, remember that game balance isn't real. It's not a hard, objective thing that we can measure and take scientific actions to fix. In reality, it's just a person's fully subjective perception. And not only that, our views can change on it, even by the day, and even when the game itself hasn't been adjusted at all. Instead of fixating so strongly on something so impossible to pin down, I believe designers should focus on much more important things when tuning a game. Those things are communicating clearly with your audience, minimizing their frustrations quickly and thoughtfully, and keeping them engaged with lots of interesting decisions to make, and surprising them with cool new interactions each time they play. And most of all, as a dev, tuning a game or a player reacting to patch notes, don't panic. If you made it to the end of the video, I hope this gets your brain flowing and makes discourse around game tuning a little stronger overall. And maybe as a bonus, it encourages gamers to give the devs who do game tuning a little more grace. I have a lot more to say on this topic, so condensing it down into this still pretty long video is quite the challenge. If you have follow-up questions or want to chat sometime, just drop a comment and I'll try to check it out. I want to thank AA for his hard work helping me write, execute, and edit this video that I've wanted to make for so long. I'd also like to thank Noah Sasso, Ultra David, Infilament, Mean Salty, and Ski Sonic for their help editing the script. The intent of this new Game Design Direct channel is to deliver more developer talk straight to you, so if you're interested in that, go ahead, click like and subscribe and all that stuff that you usually do on YouTube. If you're a game designer or interested in giving a talk in this format on this channel, contact me and we can discuss it. Thanks for watching.